Okay. I think I did. Can you see him?
Yes.
Thumbs up. Great. Okay. It's like we've been in the Zoom world for a long enough time that we've got this figured out. Thank you. Thank you all for coming along. So we're super excited to talk today about all things electric bicycles. Alex and I will give an overview of what is an electric bike and who is People for Bikes and where can you ride your bike and what is a 3-class system. We'll answer all of your questions and then we'll hand it back over to Dorian and Matt and we can answer any other kind of burning thoughts and questions that you have. So let's start with who is People for Bikes. People for Bikes is a national level advocacy nonprofit, and we are also the Bicycle Trade Association. Our mission is to get more people on bikes more often. It's a really great mission, and we believe that bikes make life great. What a great job I have. I'm very, very lucky to work at this organization. So we have 280 plus industry member suppliers, 1.4 million riders, and over 700 ride spot retailers that we represent as People for Bikes. So we are intricately connected in the bicycling world in the US, and we do a lot of work for both e-bikes and, as we in the e-bike space like to call them, acoustic bikes. We can get into whether you like that naming or not later. So our goal at People for Bikes is to make the US the best bicycling nation in the world. And this is something that we've been working on for many years, but it's also something that we know we still have a ways to go on. We have 3 different kind of strategies for how to do this. The first is building infrastructure, accelerating the construction of safe, fun, and connected places to ride. And this means both on the road and also trails. So commuting, recreating, all of that, we understand that it's really important for people to have safe places to ride. The next is through policy. So we advance pro-bike and pro-bike business legislation. Alex and I work really closely together on state, federal, and local level policy issues. And we do a lot of work advocating for better bike policy. And then finally, participation. So reducing barriers and getting more people to better understand the joys of biking. And what I love most about electric bicycles is they really do reduce a lot of those barriers for people who either haven't ridden recently or they live in a very hilly area like I do in Colorado, or many other reasons. E-bikes really break down a lot of those barriers to riding, which is great. So what is an e-bike? I'll start with e-bikes are generally very similar to traditional bikes or acoustic bikes. There are 3 components that are different. The first is the battery, which helps kind of power the bicycle. Generally, e-bikes are using lithium-ion batteries, and those batteries are have a really nice long lifespan. And we as the industry are actually working on an e-bike battery recycling program, which I don't have to go into the details here, but it's a big sustainability play. And we're really happy to be able to kind of work on this as an entire industry together. There's the controller, which really is the way that you control how you are getting this assist. So there's 3 different classes of electric bicycles. Class 1 is pedal assist, meaning that in order to get a boost from the motor, you have to be pedaling. And the maximum assisted speed that you can get on a class 1 electric bicycle is 20 miles an hour. Class 2 is throttle assist. So on your handlebars, there's a throttle that you can engage in order to get that assist from the motor. And that goes up to 20 miles an hour as well. And then class 3 is pedal assist again, so no throttle. And the maximum assisted speed is 28 miles an hour. So the maximum wattage for all bicycles in the US is 750 watts. And Alex is going to go into a little bit more around the policy for these three classes, kind of how we built them, working with our industry members, and talking a little bit more about how this Model 3 class e-bike legislation has been adopted across the country. So as you see, e-bikes don't really look that different from a traditional bicycle, and they are so darn fun to ride. And this slide shows you how much people are realizing how fun e-bikes are to ride. So we saw a huge and incredible boom in e-bike riding and general outdoor recreation during the pandemic. It was one of the very few bright spots that we've seen during the pandemic. And as you can see here, this is industry data that we've gotten from NPD Group. Traditional bicycles saw a big jump in 2020. They're still selling higher in 2021 than they were pre-pandemic. But as you can see, electric bicycles are just taking off. You can see they're a smaller market share than all traditional bicycles, but we do project that e-bikes are going to continue to rise in popularity. And one big thing that we know about e-bikes is that they are generally more expensive than traditional bicycles. And something that the industry is working on, and something that we at People for Bikes are very passionate about, is making these bikes more accessible. So this is a map of all of the different e-bike incentive programs that are going on around North America. There have been over 50 different e-bike incentive programs that have gone into place in the last few years. This is a map from TRB, from one of our partners, John MacArthur, and his students, on all of these different incentive programs. And what's so great about these incentive programs is that they really make e-bikes more accessible for more people. Traditionally, electric bicycles are anywhere from, around $1,000. They can go up to $10,000 if you're getting a really, really, really high-end piece. And that's a significant jump from a traditional bicycle price. And we know that e-bikes solve so many different problems for so many different people, whether you're commuting, whether you're recreating, whether you're, taking your kids to school like I do on the back of my e-cargo bike. We want them to be something that's accessible for many, many Americans. And we're really working to support these incentive programs. Another big thing that we're seeing as part of this huge boom in outdoor recreation that's come along with the pandemic is that there's so many more people out enjoying our recreational infrastructure. And as part of that, we are starting to see, people talking about like, well, there's just so many more people on the trails. Are e-bikes appropriate for being on these shared use paths? And we've done a decent amount of research on e-bikes and safety and speed. And this is something that's very important for the industry. It's something I talk about every day as the electric bicycle director. And e-bikes are designed to be as safe as traditional bicycles. And they really encourage people who may be discouraged from riding due to limited physical fitness, age, disability, or other reasons to get back on their bike or to get on a bike for the first time. And our research indicates that electric bicycles have a maximum speed of 20 miles an hour, including class 1 and class 2, travel at similar speeds to traditional bicycles. Whereas class 3, which can go up to 28 miles an hour, generally do go slightly faster. So this is a big and important piece for us at People for Bikes, is making sure that all riders and everyone who's using the outdoors is having a safe and enjoyable time. And we have a safety task force that we're working with this year to not only promote, safe technology and safe etiquette, but also really to advocate for more infrastructure, more commuting infrastructure, and also more recreational infrastructure, so that this huge boom in the love of the outdoors can be sustained. So now I'm going to hand it over to Alex Logeman, and he's going to dive a little bit deeper on the Model 3 class legislation.
Thank you, Ash, and thanks for having us here today. I'm Alex Logeman. I'm Policy Counsel at People for Bikes. I've been working on e-bike policy here for 7.5 years now, and have worked on a lot of these different state legislative bills and also a lot of issues at the federal level. I think before we dive into some of the aspects of the three-class legislation, it makes sense to take a step back for a minute and think about the policy and statutory environment outside of the states, because this did not develop in a vacuum. We have federal law that also governs what a lot of the state and local governments are allowed to do, and sort of figuring out which issues are in their sphere versus the federal sphere is important. Looking back to right around 2000, e-bikes have been regulated at the federal level since that time, and they're regulated for two very important aspects. One is their status as a consumer product that's regulated by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. That's the commission that sets the safety standards and the regulations that bicycles must comply with when they're first being sold. You know, you walk into a bike shop and you find reflectors on it. That's because the CPSC regulations require that. So e-bikes have been under the jurisdiction of the CPSC since 2002. And the definition of the products that fall within the CPSC's jurisdiction is fairly broad, and not completely defined in all respects, which explains some of the aspects of the model legislation. It essentially includes any type of e-bike that's pedal assist and throttle assist e-bikes that can travel up to 20 miles per hour. And they're all sort of housed in a single definition. They're not really broken down by the different types or speed or wattage or anything like that, other than that throttle limitation. So it's a fairly broad bucket of products that falls under CPSC's jurisdiction. The federal government also controls, also has controls on the types of products that can be allowed under its funding statutes. So if you are receiving, FHWA funding for non-motorized trails, you obviously need to make sure that you're not inadvertently allowing motorized vehicles to be on those trails. And e-bikes have been recognized as sort of an exemption for products that are allowed on non-motorized facilities since 1990. Sorry, I'm forgetting, it's 97 or 98. It goes back a long ways. And that statute was actually very, very recently amended to include the class-based legislation. So it's now very, very clear that any state that recognizes these three classes of legislation, they're going to be aligned with the federal law in terms of the funding provisions. And when you take advantage of those non-motorized funding resources, be able to feel much more confident that when you make your access decisions for class 1 and class 2 and class 3 e-bikes, that you're aligned with the exemption that's provided in there. So that's sort of our federal backdrop before we move into the states. The state transportation codes typically address how you use your vehicles. They're not so much product safety laws, right? They tell you how to ride, where to ride, things like that. And that's sort of the space that the Model 3 class legislation has come in to occupy. And when we first started working in this area, I think the thing we were concerned about and the thing we heard loud and clear was we really need to break down these different product types that exist out in the marketplace so that we have a better way of deciding what goes where. All e-bikes aren't the same, and they won't necessarily all be allowed in the same places, but without some consistent terminology, we won't be able to make those decisions, or we'll have a total mishmash of different terms and definitions across the entire country, or even, across local jurisdictions, which isn't going to work very well. So we knew that uniformity and sort of harmonization here was really critical within states and across the states as well. And of course, the manufacturers need certainty in terms of what types of products they can best provide to the marketplace that, are aligned with these different sort of user-based rules that state and local governments are permitted to create. So that's sort of the impetus for the creation of the different classes and our transition into working in the state legislatures. At a high level, the class system is fairly straightforward. It defines the three classes of e-bikes into the state's transportation code. And generally, it treats these products like bicycles and exempts them from the laws that apply to motor vehicles. So you don't need to register them, you don't need to title them, you don't need to get car insurance for them. They're generally regulated like bicycles, and that's the key goal. And then they also set some parameters on how e-bikes can access different types of bicycle infrastructure, and then how local governments or state agencies are empowered to sort of modify those rules. And we can go into some more detail with that in the Minnesota law, because the Minnesota law is a very good example. So I think with that overview, Ash, let's transition to the next Minnesota slide. So last year, Minnesota adopted its version of the Model 3 class bill, thanks to the work of Dorian and Bike Minnesota, or the Minnesota Bicycle Alliance. And fortunately, when working in Minnesota, we were coming from a pretty strong, I think, foundation of what the existing e-bike law was, because the Minnesota Bicycle Alliance had been, pretty far ahead of this. We have some states in the US still that don't recognize e-bikes, period. They don't have any way to classify them in their statutes. And Minnesota was way ahead of the curve here. So this bill was really more of just sort of a tweaking and updating of the Minnesota statutes rather than a wholesale overhaul or something of that nature. And, before I go on, let me just plug in the actual legislation into the chat. So if you're curious, you can kind of flip through there and see some of the updates that were made.
And Alex, Matt is going to go over that in a little bit more detail. So you can.
Okay, perfect. I will. Do you want me to just refrain and we'll move forward and Matt can do the overview? That's fine with me.
No, go ahead. You can you can keep going here.
Okay, I'll keep it very high level then and won't get overly specific. In short, it defines the 3 classes. It provides some user-based rules for bike paths, which generally allow their use. It delegates authority over, I guess, what I'll call mountain bike trails. That term has a little more specificity in the statute, but authority over those types of trails to, either the state agency or the local government that's in charge of those trails to make access decisions there. It did not change the minimum user age that was an existing Minnesota law previously. So there is a 15-year-old minimum user age for electric bicycles in Minnesota. But I think with that high level sort of pitch, I'll otherwise punt this until Matt has the opportunity to go. And again, as an aspect of that, there's some significant discretion for local governments or state agencies to sort of modify these default rules. But with that, I think, Ash, do you have any closing remarks? I'll turn it back to you first, and otherwise we can transition. So thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I think we're ready. Should we hand it over to Matt now?
Sure. It's going to be the Matt Dorian show. So I'm going to start out a little bit. And then I think we're good until, is it 2:45 or 3 o'clock? Is that?
We're scheduled until 3 o'clock. So
We'll have plenty of time for questions. Yeah.
Yep.
At the end. So take lots of notes. So here I'll start. And there's my e-bike. I have an e-cargo bike. My wife and I now fight about who goes to the grocery store. Let's see, slideshow. Oops, sorry, there we go. And where's view? Oh, play from current slide. Duh. There we go. I thought I'd spend a little bit of time, just a couple minutes, since I only know a couple of you, and tell you about the Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota. We have a similar mission, more people, more bikes, more often. But our specific one is that nobody was advocating at the Transportation Committee for biking and walking as transportation when we formed Bike Min in 2009. And nobody was providing kind of comprehensive education statewide. So that was that was our mission. And we obviously have a vision that everyone, everywhere can easily walk, bike, and roll as part of their daily life. We are not an anti-car organization. We're simply pro-bike, pro-walk. And we've been using the League of American Bicyclists Bike Friendly America program and smart cycling education curriculum for a long, long time, since the beginning. We now have 33 bike-friendly communities. I know some of you are from some of those bike-friendly communities. And that means you're doing more than just building infrastructure. I tell people you can't just build it and hope that people come. You have to do education and promotion, plan and evaluate your investments. And I also wanted to add that I should add another, just today, the Mayo Clinic was announced as our latest bike-friendly business with their 25,000 employees. So that's a big step forward. And as you can see, this is not something that's only important in the urban core. We're doing this all over the state. Bike MN's other major project is education. And these are just the locations where we're implementing our elementary school safety curriculum called Walk, Bike, Fun. We're going to be working on an adult learn to ride program in the metro area, and we would love to expand that to greater Minnesota and sometime soon. I'm not going to spend any time talking about all the things Bike MN has been doing at the legislature for the last decade, but highlighted in yellow, you can see that we did what Alex was talking about in 2011. E-bikes in Minnesota were considered mopeds, and you had to license and insure them. So in 2012, they became bicycles. And in 2021, they became the 3-class system. And in Minnesota statutes 169, the definitions, which Matt will talk about a little bit more. Also wanted to let you know, I think you're probably all familiar with the Safe Routes to School program and at the state level. And Minnesota passed an active transportation program a couple of years ago, but last year was the first time it was ever funded. And MnDOT will be soliciting projects sometime later this year. So watch for that. Also, you should probably know, and you probably already do know, that the federal transportation bill is going to be sending a lot more money to all the states as part of the Transportation Alternatives Program, and a great variety of grant programs. The other interesting thing is that for the first time ever, the federal law requires the Department of Public Safety in Minnesota to do a vulnerable user safety plan, and it makes Safe Routes to School eligible for safety money. So if you have a trail that goes by a school and it's on a busy county road, think about that. And obviously bike walk, as more and more climate money heads this way, biking and walking is going to be eligible for that too. Ash and Alex talked a little bit about tax credits for e-bikes, and that was included in the Build Back Better federal law that hasn't passed, but it will also be included in at least a proposal from the Minnesota House of Representatives. So the e-bike law that passed in 2021 was really a bipartisan thing with very little discussion. Eric the Bike Man of Eric's Bike Shop actually came out of hiding and testified to the committee. I think they were very impressed. He showed similar charts to the ones that Ash showed, that his sales are growing 100% a year of e-bikes. So it's very important. We had Senator Dibble from Minneapolis and Representative Elkins from Bloomington. The law went into effect August 1st last year. And as Alex pointed out, there are similar laws in maybe more than 35 states now. So I'll turn it over to Matt right now, and I'll click through the slides on his behalf.
Thank you, Dorian. I gave a little introduction in the chat. I've been the general counsel at Quality Bicycle Products for about 15 years now. We are the largest and nicest distributor of bicycles and bicycle accessories, repair components in the U.S. We have 4 locations, including our headquarters in Bloomington, about 800 employees total right now. We were started in our owner's garage in Bloomington, and our headquarters is about a mile from the house he still owns and mortgaged to start the company. So very kind of grassroots family run business that I'm proud to represent. And they allow me to do a lot of nonprofit work, and I've been involved with trail access probably going on 15 years now, and in Minneapolis and the metro region with Minnesota off-road cyclists, and worked with many land managers on memorandums of understanding to establish mountain bike trails. So it's kind of near and dear to my heart. As Dorian said, until 2012, e-bikes had to have a license and be insured in Minnesota, but they were very, very few. They were mostly homemade, very small companies, domestic, with lead batteries and kind of archaic drive systems. They kind of took off in Europe in the meantime. And as soon as production e-bikes started becoming available in any kind of numbers, Minnesota, being the eco-friendly state that it is, reclassified them as bicycles. That had a 20-mile-per-hour maximum speed limit that was, I think, parallel the CPSC regulations, which are, as Alex said, a little fuzzy on exactly what the speed capabilities of a bike can be. In 2021, the legislature saw fit to pass our 3-class model law that People for Bikes developed, and is the law in many other states, and brings us into kind of the majority uniform view of how to regulate e-bikes. Class 1, again, pedal assist to 20. Class 2 is a throttle bike. You just twist the throttle and it'll go as fast as 20 miles per hour without pedaling. And then those are increasingly popular, as you might imagine. No effort required. And then Class 3 bikes will provide pedal assist to 28 miles per hour. There's still quite a bit of pedaling involved to go that fast, but does it assist the rider? Next slide, please, Dorian. So these are the specific definitions in Minnesota's law. And again, they parallel that summary. It ceases to provide assistance when the speed, actually there's an S missing, the speed of 20 miles per hour is reached. Instead, missed that. And then Class 2 propels the rider and doesn't provide assistance after 20 miles per hour. And then the Class 3 electric assisted bicycle, again, 28 miles per hour. These are the statutory definitions. But where can they go? There's a typical lawyer answer here. It kind of depends. Where can they go? It depends. So under this current statute, a Class 1 or Class 2 can be operated on a bicycle path, bicycle trail, or shared use path, unless prohibited under these other sections. And Dorian, I have in the notes there which these other statutes are. I think the first one is the DNR state trails. Then 85.018 is trails built with state funds, state assisted financing. And then 160.263 covers shoulders, other bike paths and facilities. And again, those other statutory provisions give authority or recognize the authority of other governmental units, especially 160.263 of other governmental authorities, any governmental entity representing a community municipality in Minnesota will have authority to regulate where e-bikes are used in that community. Similarly, the second bullet, a person may operate a class 3 electric assisted bicycle with the motor engaged on a path, trail, or shared use path, unless the local authority or state agency having jurisdiction prohibits the operation. So it grants broad operation unless on a local basis or statewide in the case of DNR determines that the use should be restricted for class 3. In general, because a bicycle or an e-bike is treated as a bicycle on streets and roads, other than interstate highways, you can operate an e-bike of all 3 classes. So that's, I should have started there. That's the takeaway. When it gets off of the public street or road, then these other provisions kick in and give opportunities for regulation of use. And then the last one, in the case of a natural surface trail, dirt trail, mountain bike trail, class 5 gravel trail, the local or state agency has authority to determine which level of e-bike may be used or to ban them altogether if they what's the experience. So if you do, please ask them and we'll see if we can answer. You're muted, Dorian.
Yeah, we will share the contact information with you all. So I'll stop sharing so we can see you and we can have a conversation about answering any questions you may have. If I can figure out, there it is. Figure out where my cursor is.
Again, just a reminder, I'll keep an eye on the chat too. If anybody wants to just put a question in the chat, I can certainly keep an eye on that.
Or you can use the reactions box and raise your hand, and we can call on you.
I would be interested in knowing if any of you in greater Minnesota have had user conflicts. I mean, I have not heard of that happening much at all in the metro trails. I don't know if the numbers are huge, but if citizen complaints, scared my dog, whizzed by me, those are all the things that people for bikes and mountain bike organizations want to know about so that they can address. And I just don't know what level of concern might be out there amongst the public.
Matt, this is Brad with Rat County Parks and Recreation. I can answer a little bit of that. We haven't had a whole lot of controversy, but we don't have a whole lot of kind of more transportation style trails. Where we have the biggest issue is e-bikes on the mountain bike trails. We do get some conflict there because of the speed that they can maintain. And so there's guys that are trying to climb hills. That's just where we get the conflict, is with the difference in how those guys are maintaining their speed as they come through. And then guys, as I guess Ash called it, the acoustic bikes. That's the biggest thing we have. And then it's also just wear and tear on the trail when you're dealing with single track too. Those guys get up going fast enough, they can run things out a little bit quicker. But hadn't been huge, but we've had a few comments and a few complaints in that.
And
Brad, as a quick follow-up to that, is it primarily a problem when the e-bike is traveling uphill and that's where its speed differential comes into play, or is it kind of all around?
I think it's kind of all around. I think the biggest issue would be with the uphill from what we've heard, but I do know that we get it kind of all around. Because our trail that we have is kind of what we would say is a blue-black, so it's got some technical difficulties that are man-made features that we put in, but there's also some you can be a beginner and still get around the full 14.5 miles with no problem. So you get a lot of introductory riders, kind of medium, in between. And then you get these e-bikes that come out and they just fly through it and can cause some problems.
And I'm going to answer Jacob's question. So Matt and People for Bikes don't have to. The answer is your local bicycle retailer. And that is is there a specific vendor you would recommend purchasing an e-bike from? We obviously don't recommend a specific vendor, but just about everybody has them nowadays. And Quality Bicycle Products, I believe, is even a distributor. But you have to buy everything from Quality through your local bike shop anyway.
You know, People for Bikes has 280 members, so you're really putting Alex and Ash in a spot there if you're asking them to recommend a particular brand.
Yeah.
I would say any bike shop is a preferable place to buy an e-bike. They are available online. Sometimes those come direct from Chinese companies, sometimes from a warehouse that they are renting somewhere in the United States. The quality of those and the availability of repair parts is somewhat less. They are less expensive, but I would highly recommend the sales and service support you would get from a local retailer. On the question of people being passed on mountain bike trails, I should say I don't actually own an e-bike, and yet I can advocate for them. I'm a old-fashioned mountain biker, maybe emphasis on the old. So I've experienced that, and it's kind of frustrating to have somebody whiz by on this climb I'm struggling to get up. So and I will say originally there was a lot of pushback from the mountain bike community on e-bikes from traditional bikers. Hey, we worked really hard to get these mountain bike trails established. Now these e-bikes are whizzing around. We don't like that. Motors cheating. That's really settled down a lot. I think there's broader acceptance and understanding of the place of e-bikes. And I'll say my riding buddy and best friend uses an e-bike because he has to. He couldn't mountain bike with me, slow as I am, without the use of his e-bike due to some auto accident injuries. So I definitely think there's a place for them, and if education and reasonable regulation keeps pace, I think there'll be a great addition for recreational opportunities.
Yeah, I mentioned that. Like I said, it's just one of the complaints. It's not a huge complaint, but you asked, and so I figured I'd let you know. Yeah, we've heard it. Is it constant? Not necessarily. Anytime there's change to an industry, there's always complaints.
There is another question in the chat from Tom in New Ulm about rules or ordinances to keep e-bikes from conflicting with other bicycles on paved city trails. And I think I'll leave that maybe to Ash and Alex. You do have the authority, I think, to set a speed limit. And if you do have twisty, turny, narrow trails, you may want to set a speed limit of and Matt, I believe if you go and look at the law, I think it says something to the effect of reasonable and prudent. So people are not supposed to be going 28 miles an hour on a crowded, twisty, turny trail. But Matt or Alex, Ash, do you want to follow up on that?
I can speak to.
Sorry, Matt. You go ahead, Matt.
I can only speak to Minneapolis. You know, Minneapolis has a 10-mile-per-hour speed limit that is, I would say, rarely complied with on its paved bike trails. Fortunately, there's a lot of separated and not a lot of combined bike trails, but those sorts of speeds are pretty common on our chain of lakes trails, especially. But I don't think those are under the jurisdiction of the Minneapolis Park Board. I'm not sure. I was just trying to check today, and I don't think that they've made a statement one way or the other on e-bike use. They're just treating them as bicycles at the moment. Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, at this point, we haven't really seen a need to create sort of a paved path oriented, model ordinance or anything of that nature for e-bikes. In places where we've seen this come up, I think we've seen some common issues that are potentially better treated in other ways. The first, I think there may be a question for the local government to think about the use of class 3 e-bikes. But beyond that issue, I think the real underlying problems are congestion and adequacy of the existing infrastructure for the volume or number of people who are using it. And so when we've had local governments sort of bring these types of conflicts to us, we've really tried to hone in on the issues of enforcement, so people aren't speeding, regardless of what their sort of modality is, but also assessing what the state of the infrastructure is, and if there's sort of an infrastructure related problem and solution that can be used to help mitigate any conflict that might be present in certain areas. Because I think sort of there isn't really a distinction that can be addressed through the rules in terms of behavior per se between, the class 1 and class 2 e-bike riders and the regular e-bike riders. They're all sort of subject to the same speed limits and types of conduct and, trail courtesy and things like that. We just need to make sure we're enforcing it and providing enough space for everybody.
I think the other question.
Can I jump in, Dorian?
Yeah, go ahead.
Tom, City of New Ulm Park and Rec, Southern Minnesota. Alex, I agree with what you ended there with. I mean, our conflicts have to do with speed and sound, noise. E-bikes are very quiet, but you can't differentiate that between e-bikes and A-bikes. I mean, A-bikes can go just as fast as an e-bike at times, and A-bikes can be just as quiet as an e-bike. So we can't do anything about really speed and sound because we have to treat A-bikes and e-bikes the same with that. So it really boils down to motorized. I mean, our trail is a non-motorized trail. So are there any local jurisdictions that say you can't have an e-bike on a non-motorized trail? That I guess would be my question.
I mean, certainly some local governments have taken the position of, we have the authority to control access to our trails, and we want this to be fully non-motorized in its purest sense. The goal, I think, with the state laws have been to provide a backdrop that, sort of reverses that historical, hesitancy to maybe allow e-bikes into that environment because of, the desired user experience from the folks who buy them and the benefits of better transportation and recreation opportunities. But again, the statutes pretty much in every state do provide a significant level of local authority to address and ultimately restrict, if that's what's desired locally, access.
Cliff, did you have a question?
Go ahead.
Right, get myself unmuted here. No, my comment was simply that I represent the Lake Wobegon Trail Association in Central Minnesota, and we have noticed just a tremendous increase in electric bikes on the trails, especially in the last 2 years. And I've not really heard of any conflicts. I've heard a lot of positive things from folks who have, physical disabilities or whatever, and electric bikes have allowed them to get out and use the trails again. With regard to conflicts, we've had conflicts existing, and I think most of those are simply due to people not abiding by just common sense bike safety rules. We have a lot of issues with riders who are the high-speed riders who are riding road bikes on the trail and just cruising past. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard of cases where that's happened, and 2 other riders have been on the trail, and somebody will come whizzing by, and the 2 behind them will fall, and people have injured themselves. They've had broken ankles, things like that. So I don't know how the thing is, how do you educate people to be aware of that? That's one of our goals in our Trails Association, is try to figure out a way to do a better job of presenting those rules and regulations and educating people. So Dorian, at some time I'll have to talk to you about how to do that.
Yeah, no, I think it's yield to the slower rider. I think we just have to continue our education work. And I also noted another question in the chat box about the future of e-bikes. As in the ATV world, it seems that there's always bigger, faster, more power. And that is exactly why we partnered with People for Bikes, who partnered with friends all over the world to, this is a worldwide standard that we've accepted. And we want to make sure that we're out in front of this, that just everybody knows that if you make a bike that goes 30 miles an hour, it's got to be licensed and it's got to be insured, even if it's electric or internal combustion powered. So it's my hope, and Ash and Alex and Matt can weigh in here, that this puts us out in front of everything, and that we aren't going to see a lot of bikes. Of course, there's always going to be some, but there aren't going to be a lot of bikes, electric bikes, or mopeds disguised as electric bikes trying to go 35 miles an hour on our regional trails.
Do you want to maybe try and address the question about conflicts or rules between e-bikes or bikes and equestrian trails?
I can address that slightly, but also back to Dorian's point. Yeah, we really worked hard at People for Bikes to distinguish between an e-bike, what is an e-bike and what is not an e-bike. And the 3-class system is really designed to be able to say these e-bikes generally can share bicycling infrastructure, and things that do not fall within this 3-class system are not designed to be on these on the roads with other cyclists and in these bike lanes and on paths. So yes, there's always a motivation to make things go faster, but there's also just the recognition that this is generally a people-powered technology, and we want e-bikes to be as similar to bikes as they can be, while also allowing people to ride farther and not get quite so sweaty as we go up those hills. Sweaty may not be the thing in Minnesota, but maybe you're just slightly warmer. Related to the equestrian trails, again, so much of this is based more on the local decision makers. We do have some examples of different areas that have integrated mountain biking with equestrian. There's a great example out of the Tahoe National Forest that has done a few pilots. But again, the EMTV work is pretty new. And a lot of what People for Bikes is doing is working on kind of helping figure out what are those pilot studies, what are those case studies that we can look at, and how do we build those resources for decision makers on the ground.
I agree, Ash. And etiquette here and education is just so key. I mean, mutual respect for the other user groups out on the trail and yielding in the appropriate way to the other trail users is so important. And I'm sure what a lot of folks are going to find with e-bikes is we just have a lot of new people coming into the bike space who may not know that much about biking, and may not know all the things that or that people who have been biking for a decade know, and they're getting back into this after maybe not riding their bike since they were a kid, or barely knowing how to ride a bike at all. And ultimately, in our view, this is a good thing. We want more people on bikes, but we have to help facilitate that transition as they sort of evolve from maybe a new bike rider into a more experienced one with the right information, because so much of that conflict, I think, can just be mitigated with the right information and etiquette and respect.
But in the Minnesota law, a natural surface trail, which is probably an equestrian trail, or that is an equestrian trail, the local trail manager has the authority to do what they think is right. And I know Minnesota state parks are very strict about bicycles and equestrians, so and horses. So I think that's important. There was another question, Ash and Alex. I don't think Matt and I have the answer to that, but is there a design standard that's being developed for trails, or are we just sticking to the bicycle trail standards that are out there?
I know that there are conversations. We just had a conversation with IMBA, International Mountain Biking Association, this morning. There are conversations about kind of growing unidirectional trails and exploring kind of what that means as we build more trails. But to my knowledge, we do not have design standards in place. Alex, am I wrong?
No, there's no existing ones. It's certainly an ongoing conversation in a lot of different areas, especially, you know, not only off-road, but, you know, in sort of like the on-road NACTO kind of space. You know, I think that's less of an issue when you're talking about class 1 and class 2, especially for paved type trails, because those are usually pretty accommodating of handling that type of speed. You know, the speed limit in most places is 15 to 20 miles per hour, and the trail's built to accommodate that, which is going to be within the you know, realm of what a class 1 and class 2 e-bike rider is going to be doing. I think where we could see more here is this sort of concept of you know, bicycle superhighways really oriented at helping facilitate commuting and things like that, and designed around the idea of, you know, you might be on a class 3 e-bike going 20 to 28 miles an hour for a lot of that journey, as opposed to 15, which would be, you know, would require a different sort of design standard around curves and blind spots and all that sort of stuff.
I would just say the one time I shared a trail with equestrians, they all had rifles because it was Utah. And so I gave them a wide berth. They suggested that I get a horse as well. So great gentlemen. I put something in the chat, a link to People for Bikes resources on out of category bikes. It is a big concern for People for Bikes and the industry. I mean, we don't want electric motorcycles on bike facilities. We don't want to see the kinds of injuries that would come along with that to their operators and anyone they might encounter. So we have a strong stance against what we call out of category e-bikes. They look like an e-bike, but their capabilities are much greater in terms of power and speed. That while they are probably illegal to sell under federal law, people will modify their bikes, or there are just some unscrupulous sellers out there that will sell you that product and say, well, it's for off-road use on private land or off-highway vehicle trails, and then those devices wind up on public trails not intended for motorized use. So it's unfortunate. We are trying to address that as well as Ash mentioned, our safety initiative to push out training to the public.
So I see we're getting close to 3 o'clock. So on behalf of the Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota, Quality Bicycle Products, and People for Bikes, thank you all for inviting us and for wanting to be out ahead on this issue. I think it's really, really important. You've seen that sales are going up dramatically, and I think they're only going to increase going up as you probably know, a lot of bike shops sell things before they even get them in. So biking has become really, really popular. And I think because of climate-related issues and congestion-related issues, the government is going to be incentivizing the purchase of e-bikes at different levels, whether it's local levels or state or national levels. So there's going to be more, and thank you. And of course, we got a couple more minutes and would be happy to answer more questions if there are some.
Would it be okay with several of you for additional questions if they contacted you directly? Maybe put your email in the chat if you're willing to have folks contact you outside of this forum. I think this has been really informational and really great. We really appreciate that the 4 of you were able to join in the meeting. And we will make sure we have this recorded and we will post it on our Greater Minnesota webpage as well. So you can kind of spread the word that they can go to the website and view this later. I foresee when we have questions come up in the future, we'll probably refer back to this and just rewatch this to help re-answer our questions. Yeah, we very much appreciate you coming and educating us a little bit more today.
And we can send you, I can send you a link to the law that passed that you can share with everyone. And that'll help you navigate your way around Minnesota Statute 169 and where these are and the connections to the DNR and other trail regulations that are in statute.
We appreciate the opportunity. It was a great conversation today. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Pleasure to be here.